Hello YouTube, Dave here again. A couple months ago I started finally getting the opportunity to run a regular D&D campaign. It's something that I decided to do on a monthly basis, so usually it's one session a month, to make it easier for everybody to be able to get together, because it can be difficult, as you get older to be able to get people together on a weekly or even bi-weekly basis. So I figured once a month would be easy for all of us to be able to commit to, seeing as how most of us, if not all of us in the campaign at this point in time, have children. And what I decided to do was actually run the Curse of Strahd campaign. It was the campaign that I was most interested in of the pre-written ones that I had at the time I made this decision. It was around the time that I kind of purchased Storm King's Thunder, but I decided that I wanted to run with Curse of Strahd just because it seemed unique enough and might make for an interesting campaign. So I sat down and after I kind of got some players interested and started reading through the campaign, one of the things that I really wanted to do is kind of explain or justify how the realm of Barovia interacts with Faerun, which is something that is completely ignored in the campaign itself. So just a little bit of a background, I guess. Barovia, or the realm of Ravenloft, is what's considered to be like a demi-plane, in that it's not really a consistent plane of existence that is easy to interact with. It's not having like a set place in the cosmology. They use this as a device to have it sort of interact with other campaign settings. One of the more famous examples is when it interacted with the world of Krynn, and Lord Soth, the Death Knight in the Dragonlance campaign setting, was for a time trapped within the realm of Ravenloft. So it's something that they kind of used throughout the past, but I wanted there to be a justification for it. So when I sat down to work on the campaign, that was one of the first things that I decided to do. Now, for those that are actually part of the campaign, I kind of prefer if you didn't watch this. I don't know how much this justification is going to play a role in the campaign in the future, but it could be something that is a bit of a spoiler. So depending on how I decide to do things going forward, just recommend that you don't really watch this until later on, until we've completed the story elements from the Curse of Strahd campaign, just in case I decide to actually have this play a major role in the campaign itself. So, how did Barovia and Faerun intersect with one another? It was a question that I kind of found difficult because, again, the campaign doesn't really explain it, and in the campaign, one of the outcomes is that if the players are victorious, they just kind of ride off into the sunset down the Slavic road, but it doesn't really help because, where is it in the world, and how does it, how do the players kind of really get sucked into it type of thing. So one of the things that I ended up turning to was a novel that I had recently, maybe about a year or so ago, read, but it was Night of the Hunter by R.A. Salvatore, part of the Legend of Drizzt series. And at the end of the book, Gromf Benair, the Archmage of Menzoberranzan, goes to the surface and conducts this ritual with a bunch of other very powerful wizards to cause what's called the Darkening. And what the Darkening is it shrouds the north, or the Silver Marches, their region of the Forgotten Realms, in this perpetual layer of cloud and shadow. So it's pretty much dusk at the best of times, and almost like perpetual night type of thing. This was done for a few different reasons, but one, I think, because the Drow were heavily involved in the events taking place on the surface at this time, that it would make it easier for them to kind of integrate and be able to operate out in the open type of thing. But I thought it was kind of cool, and the way that I have it in my campaign world is that it basically brought part of the Shadowfell directly into the Prime Material world. And one of the byproducts of this ritual is that it drew the realm of Barovia, or Ravenloft, to sort of start to coalesce with the Prime Material world that is the Forgotten Realms, or Faerun. So that's kind of the background of how that happened. And then what I decided I was going to do is I'm going to start the player characters off in the Forgotten Realms at level 1, because I really wanted to run the introductory chapter, which was entitled Death House, in this campaign. I just absolutely loved that adventure, and I wanted to run it. So I started the players off at first level, and I started them off actually in Waterdeep. So the player characters were all first level, so they were all struggling adventurers trying to make name for themselves, earn a living, make some coins, stuff like that. They were all pretty well strapped for cash at the time that this campaign began. So I'm just gonna basically in this video, what I wanted to do is just kind of talk about the first session. What happened in the first session, and if you guys like it, I already have the second session was already done and over with, so I'll probably do a video for that as well. And if you guys are interested in seeing how the story unfolds, or how I kind of do it my way sort of thing, then certainly just let me know in the comments if you are interested in these videos, if you enjoy hearing how the campaign went, and I'll be sure to do these for each of the videos. Before I get into the description of what happened, I do for my campaigns usually set up a Facebook private group for everybody, and what I'll do in that is usually post updates about when we're going to get together type of thing, a little bit of story elements that the players may need to know ahead of time to set things up. But I also include, pictures of relevant NPCs that are in the that they come across in the adventures, as well as recaps of the sessions. Basically, so that if someone misses it, for example, one of my players, she's in the Canadian military and is currently, at the time of this recording, overseas on deployment. So she's not able to join the regular campaign. So as much for her as it is just kind of have a record of what happened myself, I just write down kind of a description of everything that happened. And I try to do it in a way that's almost storytelling-esque, I guess. So without further ado, I'll just kind of start with the session and how it began, and at the end I'll just throw in a couple of notes as to how or why I did some of the things that I did. So the campaign begins with our intrepid adventurers. Their tale begins in a tavern that I called the Rusty Chum Bucket, which was this really rundown, skeezy tavern right by the docks in Waterdeep. It was meant to be like the grimiest of the grimy, and just showing how kind of poor the characters are at this point in time, that's kind of the best that they were able to afford. So the player characters that are actually active in the campaign at this point in time are a wood elf ranger by the name of Lucian, a half-elf warlock by the name of Zane Leroux, and a tiefling sorcerer by the name of Abigail. I may go into more detail about their characters in future videos, but the sorcerer uses wild magic as her power source, and I haven't really explored that too much yet. But in addition to that, I did have one of the players who expressed an interest, who kind of dropped off the face of the earth before the campaign happened. He wanted to make a half-orc paladin. Since the party lacked a melee fighter at this point in time, or the ranger was focused on archery, I did end up making the half-orc paladin as an NPC, and I'm still working on an actual name for him. I just kind of left the name open in case the player actually did end up showing up in a future point. But like I said, I haven't heard from him for months now at this point, so I removed him from the group. And one of the things I'm going to do is work on a name for the paladin. But at this point in time, I'm just going to refer to him as the paladin, as he is currently an NPC, and his name was to be determined at this point. So the player characters began their adventure by meeting and interacting with a messenger from the town of Daggerford by the name of Aidan Pym. He was sent to seek aid from mighty heroes, as the town of Daggerford was plagued by a series of troubles, such as things like bandits on the roads, orcs and goblins in the woods threatening loggers and woodsmen, and a pack of wolves that have been becoming very aggressive, which have been reported to have been led by this gigantic wolf the size of a horse that attack most of the hunters that enter seeking prey for food and stuff like that. So our heroes, deciding to help out the beleaguered town, begin to make their journey from Waterdeep to Daggerford, which is going to end up taking several days. The first couple of days did pass uneventfully, but on the third day of travel, I wanted to have an encounter thrown in there, just because this was a new group that was playing together for the first time, first level characters, and I wanted to do something that was a little bit outside of the Curse of Strahd campaign to start things off with. So on the third day of travel, Lucian, the the Wood Elf Ranger, detected a nearby threat. So at this point I had them make spot checks, or perception checks I guess I should say. Abigail spotted several goblins hiding in wait, one of which was mounted on a wolf. Zane, the half-elf warlock, unfortunately was somewhat distracted by the sight of his own boots, while the paladin, that was traveling with the party, just kind of gave him advice on how to clear the mud off his boots. It was a moment of levity that I want to throw in there because they both rolled really awful perception checks. I think natural ones or something really bad. So they were completely oblivious as to what was going on. As the combat erupted, the fearless goblin leader commanded his minions to attack, and they promptly stood around since actually their initiative was pretty bad. So the leader went on like an 18 or 20, and the goblins that were with him I think went on a 5 or 6, so they were pretty bad. Abigail lobbed a blob of acid at the mounted goblin. The goblin was badly burned by the acid, and its mount wanted absolutely none of that. So the mount actually made its reflex saving throw, and in the process, where the goblin had taken damage and the wolf did not, and made its successful saving throw, at this point the goblin leader was actually thrown from his mount, rolling a really awful check to kind of hold on. At that point, Lucien let loose an arrow that savagely pierced the thrown leader, ended up being a critical hit, bringing the sweet release of death to the suffering goblin. Seeing this, 2 of the remaining 3 goblins thought discretion was a better part of valor and fled. So they just kind of took off and ran because they didn't want any part of what was about to happen. So at this point, the 3rd goblin, who was probably never accused of being the smart one, remained behind and met a pretty brutal and swift demise at the hands of the player characters. So with their first battle a success, the player characters kind of enjoyed the fact that they did exceedingly well. I don't think they took hardly any damage at all, maybe a few points to one of the characters, but it was actually a really, really good, quick fight, and like I said, the way that the leader was dealt with was so swift and brutal that I had to make that morale check for the goblins. But that was the first encounter. They did exceedingly well, and they had a little bit of confidence going as they decided to continue on their journey towards Daggerford. And that's when things started to go a little bit awry. The morning after their victorious battle against the goblins, the party were met with the curiously darkened sky. The sun's light was feeble and barely stronger than moonlight. Undeterred, our heroes continued on their journey towards Daggerford. As the day went on, the air grew cooler and a thick fog began to roll in. The fog grew thicker until it obscured all, even the ground upon which our adventurers walked. Curiously, our heroes were able to see each other perfectly as if there were no fog at all, but everything else was completely obscured, including the ground beneath them. So they could see each other perfectly, but they weren't able to see any other details, making it a very unusual fog. Abigail claimed that she could see the faces of men and beasts swirling amongst the fog, but no one else could see anything to verify it. After a few minutes, Zane, the warlock, began hearing voices as if 1,000 humans were all whispering at once. But again, nobody else was able to hear anything. The packed earth that the player characters were walking on along the path to Daggerford began to give way to a gravel road that did not belong where they were. The fog began to part before them and our heroes, which revealed a village that looked to be almost completely abandoned. Lucien was able to hear soft whimpers coming from within the village, and approached the source with all the grace and stealth of a herd of elephants, rolling an absolutely horrible number on his stealth check. Through the mists, he saw the 2 children, which I'll show you a picture of here if I can. So these are the 2 children that he saw. The 2 children, Rose and Thorn, Rose being the older girl, and Thorn being the name of the smaller boy who was clutching the stuffed animal to him, told our heroes that there was a monster in the basement of their home and they were scared to go back there. They said that their parents had locked the monster away, but they were concerned that their baby brother Walter was still trapped inside the house. The player characters determined that they were going to seek out what was going on, entered the house, but the children, Rose and Thorn, refused to enter and said that they would wait outside. Entering the home, the heroes examined several rooms on the first floor. The main hall had a beautifully carved wood paneling depicting vines, flowers, nymphs, and satyrs. It seemed quite lovely until closer inspection revealed that serpents and skulls were also carved into the scenery. Similarly, a pair of doors on the second floor seemed to have dancing youths carved in, but again a closer look showed that the children were not dancing, but fighting off a swarm of attacking bats. A large family portrait was displayed on the fireplace on the second floor, and it depicted the family that lived here, including Rose, whose real name was Rosavalda, Thorn, Thornbolt, being his full name, Elizabeth, and Gustav Durst, being the family name. Gustav held a swaddled baby that Elizabeth looked upon with a hint of scorn. The moment, however, the player characters observing the painting was interrupted when suits of armor flanking doors near the staircase that they came up to animated and began to attack. After defeating the armor, Lucien found a key that belonged to the library or study that the two suits of armor were guarding. Opening the locked door, our heroes entered the library itself. Zane, the warlock, discovered a secret room filled with books dedicated to the occult. The tomes belonged to a cult named the Priest of Auspice. After glancing through a few of the tomes, the warlock and the sorcerer both realized that the rituals were largely nonsense and would not yield any specific results. However, also in the secret room was a chest that was moderately trapped. Zane was struck by a dart that no longer contained poison, as the poison within had dried up, but still took a few points of damage from the trap itself. The chest contained 3 blank spellbooks, 3 scrolls, a deed to the house, a deed for a windmill, and a signed will, as well as a letter written in cursive. The letter read, "My most pathetic servant, I am not a Messiah sent to you by the dark powers of this land. I have not come to lead you on a path of immortality. However many souls you have bled on your hidden altar, however many visitors you have tortured in your dungeon, know that you are not the ones that brought me to this beautiful land. You are but worms writhing in my earth. You say you are cursed, your fortune spent. You abandoned love for madness, took solace in the bosom of another woman, and sired a stillborn son. Cursed by darkness? Of that I have no doubt. Save you from your wretchedness? I think not. I much prefer you as you are. Your dread lord and master, Strahd von Zarovich." And the discovery of this note actually concluded the first session of play. So those were the events that took place in the first session. Now, a lot of what happened in the first session was also, there was a lot of character generation that occurred as well. So the first about an hour and a half was taken up just simply doing that. And the session ran, I think, for about 4 hours total. And there was reasons why I kind of did some of the things that I did. So wanting to have the campaign start off in the Forgotten Realms, and have it start off in a relatively normal way is something that I wanted to do, just to kind of have a sense of comfort for the players, and have it, be a stark contrast to the way things ended up being once they crossed over. In the beginning, I used quite a bit of humor with the encounter with the goblins. In fact, when the 2 goblins fled after the leader was completely destroyed in a matter of seconds, they ended up leaving twin trails of urine behind that were designed for the wolf to find its way back to their home, which is the story that I used, but they basically were so terrified that they just ended up soiling themselves and off they ran. I wanted to do that because, again, I wanted there to be a little bit of humor in the beginning, and I wanted it to feel like a tonal shift in the gameplay had occurred once they entered the mist. So having the lighthearted battle with the goblins, having sort of the comedic elements of the goblin being thrown from the wolf, which was actually not an idea that I had. After the goblin took damage and the wolf made their save, one of the players actually asked if there was a chance that the wolf would throw the rider, because of the fact that one failed and one passed, and it seemed like something that could very well happen. So with that in mind, I ended up making the check. I rolled poorly, so I decided to have the goblin actually be thrown from the wolf. So it was an example of kind of letting the player characters help aid the storytelling as well a little bit. So otherwise, if that suggestion hadn't come up, I never would have actually thought of it. Another thing that ended up happening afterwards was one of the goblins that was still behind was missed pretty wildly by, I think it was the warlock, who attacked it, rolling if not a natural one, close enough to it that it missed by a mile. So, that blast of the Eldritch Bolt that it threw ended up slamming into the deceased corpse, I should say, of the goblin leader. It's just, again, it was something that I wanted to do that was kind of lighthearted. Once they crossed over into the mist, then, again, things completely changed. There were no more real joking at this point in time, aside from the fact that, the stealth check was pretty bad. I mean, you kind of have to joke about stuff like that. But seeing the voice, or hearing the voices, and seeing the faces, and the properties of the mist itself did put the players on edge, and made them very uneasy. They tried some things like lighting a torch, seeing if they could see the torch light, which they could, and then throwing the torch ahead to see if they could see it through the mist. And again, they couldn't until they got basically right on top of it. They're meeting with the children. When the children did speak, it was mostly Rose that I had speak, which I think is kind of written into the campaign anyway. Thorn was very much more emotional. He tended to be very frightened and weary, whereas Rose was just almost emotionally dead. So the way that they interacted with the children, the player characters did find to be a little bit unsettling. As well as the elements that occurred within when they looked at the wood paneling, for example, which is written into the campaign, and really well done, I would say. I never volunteered any of this information. The player characters basically, said that they were examining the room. I had them roll perception checks, and whoever got the highest was the person that kind of noticed that. I didn't really have a plan for the animated armor. That's actually not part of the adventure, but I wanted them to have another combat encounter, and we were getting near the point where we're going to start cutting things off. So when Lucien, the Elven Ranger, started kind of kicking at suits of armor, I thought, why not have this be an opportunity for one to animate? I mean, there were animated suits of armor in the adventure, so I thought, why not have some here as well? I made them a little bit weaker than the one that they fought individually. But I still thought, again, while he was testing it and being paranoid about it, why not kind of work that in a little bit and have that encounter take place? Having the locked door was a decision that was made because I wanted the player characters to find that note, and that was going to be kind of the way I wanted to end the first session. So having the door locked made it so that the player character subconsciously wanted to go into that room first, and they found the key, which was on one of the suits of armor. If they hadn't, if that wasn't a situation, if there was a rogue in the party, then I would have allowed them the opportunity to pick the lock. But the person that's playing a rogue at this point in time, she's the one that's currently overseas. So that's basically just kind of what I wanted to do there. Now, you can see my really bad map that I drew. Try not to judge too much. I'm not an artist, but the player characters, or the players in the group, wanted to use miniatures. So I ended up buying these large sheets of draft paper that have like the 1-inch grid on it, and I just kind of drew the stuff on there. Some later ones I think got a little bit better, but this one was pretty rough. But anyway, that's the story of the first session, the events that occurred, some of the decisions that I made to start the campaign off, an example of the player characters being able to help again with the storytelling, with the goblin leader being thrown from the goblin, or the wolf it was on. And it was a great session. I had a lot of fun running it, and it's a really great group of players so far that I've got. So I'm really lucky with that. We all had a great time, or at least they said they had a great time. I'm hoping that they did. But that was the first session. So I'm going to do a video for the second session, which I have the write-up for already. That'll probably be within the next couple of days. And again, if you guys are actually interested in these campaign stories, then please let me know. And if it's something that you guys do like, then I will continue to do them going forward. Anyway, I just wanted to do this video because, again, I had a really fun time running it, and I thought that, it might help maybe a little bit if someone's deciding to run a campaign, run this campaign themselves. And I'll explain more about some of the decisions that I made in the second session video, which has them completing this particular chapter. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.